When Black folks say we built this country, they literally mean we built this country. Black folks have farmed, planted, tilled, and cultivated agricultural and food production in America since their arrival from Africa on slave ships. Their labor helped to create global capitalism and has transformed American food production, animal farming, and cooking. Yet, Black farmers' ability to accumulate wealth, land, and income has been halted and stymied by systemic racism and discriminatory federal programs implemented by none other than the United States government. Today, we are examining the plight of Black farmers and their ongoing fight for justice. All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Black farmers have faced historic discrimination by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In 1920, there were nearly 1 million Black farmers. Those farmers owned about 14% of all U.S. farms. Today, there are fewer than 50,000 Black farmers, and they own less than 1% of American farmland. These disparities reflect oppressive practices by the United States government after slavery that have continued to the present. Former enslaved African Americans, after being promised agricultural land in General Order 15, often referred to as 40 acres and a mule, that promise as compensation for decades of unpaid labor during slavery, were instead coerced through violence and economic intimidation into sharecropping that kept Black farmers living in perpetual debt. And even after passage of watershed civil rights legislation in the 1960s, the USDA continued to discriminate against Black farmers. Even efforts by President Biden today to assist Black farmers has been met with tremendous backlash from white Republicans and has halted any efforts to provide support for Black farmers. Given the decades-long fight for parity, what is the future for America's Black farmers? My first guest is John Boyd Jr. He is a fourth-generation Virginia farmer and the founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association. Good morning and welcome to the show, John.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And you did a good job on that opening statement. You really took us from slavery to where we are today. So just so much.
Well, thank you for that, John. You know, I am so fascinated. I have seen your face pretty much everywhere on news articles, in the news, on news programs and shows. You definitely are the face of the fight for Black farmers in terms of, the fight for civil justice, equal justice. But I want to start with your personal story because that's so fascinating to me. You are a fourth generation farmer in Virginia. Help us understand what your family's history is like and how it is that you became a farmer after three generations before you have also farmed land in Virginia.
Yes, and again, thank you for having me. I'm a fourth generation farmer, and I was trained to farm by my daddy, John Boyd Sr., and my grandfather, Thomas Boyd. To me, was one of the greatest human beings who lived and taught me about land ownership very, very early on. This man slept with his deeds underneath his mattress. That's how, and he taught me every step you take, every step you make requires land ownership. You can either be walking on your own or trespassing on someone else's. And he taught me that a poor business is better than a good job any day of the week, because you can't fire me and you can't leave your PhD to your children, but I can leave my poor raggedy farm to my children. So he said land was everything. Everything good came from land. Timber came from land. Cotton came from land. Water came from land. Food came from land. Everything good came from the farm is what I was taught. And as we were taught as a group of people, everything bad about farming. Slavery was bad, sharecropping was bad, Jim Crow was bad. But we have to start looking at farming in a positive light. So I've been farming for 38 years.
Wow, that's so incredible. I'm an entrepreneur that owns several family businesses, so I'm going to quote what you just said about a bad business versus a good job. I'm going to tell that to my kids when they get
Yeah,
tired and start whining and complaining. So,
that's right. Take a chance on a business because it's yours, and if it fails, it's yours, and if it succeeds, it's yours.
yeah, no,
And you can go out and work 30 years for a company and won't even get a handshake when you leave, but you can leave your business to the next generation. So we need to really look at land ownership and building wealth and equity in this country.
no, absolutely. John, help us understand the diversity, because I think there's a misnomer about Black farmers, or a lot of misinformation out there, I should say, about the breadth of farming that happens by Black farmers. I know you farm soybean, corn, wheat. You have cattle. You used to be a chicken farmer. So,
Yeah.
what are Black farmers growing?
Well, we grow everything. And for the record, there are many in the United States that don't even know that Black farmers exist. So, we have that area where we have to do outreach to the portion of the United States that don't even know that Blacks even farm, and they tend to forget the history of it. And you touched on it from slavery. We were here and forced to work for free, and then sharecropping, where to me was a continuation in the form of slavery, and then the horrific Jim Crow laws. Even after we owned the land after the Civil War, we still couldn't go sell crops on our own. We had to sell them to a white farmer, and all of those egregious acts. And we're still here today farming the soil. And for the record, Black farmers are some of the best farmers.
Mm.
We were able to survive all of the natural hurricanes and all of these things, and we still surviving discrimination. So we are very, very tough people here, and we've been mistreated by the government, by companies, all of these things. They stole land. USDA stole millions of acres of land through a program called the Lease Back Buyback Program, that forced our Black farmers to sign their deeds back to the government, where white farmers received debt relief that I've been fighting for 30 years for. They received loan reamortization, debt write-downs. These are things that were offered to white farmers when acts of Mother Nature came into play. And when those things were done to Black farmers, we were giving a 30-day acceleration notice where we had to pay up all of the balance within 30 days. And then we were offered the Lease Back Buyback Program. It was a legal way to get millions of acres from Black farmers because the government never leased it back to us. And I was one of those farmers that had a farm in the Lease Back Buyback Program. So USDA, we called it the last plantation, discriminated against Black farmers since my tenure as a farmer. And they continue to discriminate against Black farmers right now as I speak to you on this show. So I don't want people to think this is something that's happened in the past. It's something that's happening right now. So here we have a program that came out, a 30-year-old request, and Republicans are spending it like it's a new loan program that excludes white farmers. It doesn't exclude white farmers. White farmers were the ones getting the debt write-downs the whole time. They were the ones getting the loans the whole time. They were the ones getting all of the subsidies the whole time. How many times are you going to get it? But when you can get some relief, then they take to the courts and say by Blacks and other farmers of color to get this relief is in some sort of way unconstitutional and in some sort of way harmful to them. So for people who don't know what discrimination is, that's what that is. When they can have and you can't. And this is a continuation of all of those things that I just described. We got to have ours too, people. And what I'm saying to white farmers in this country, you can't have it all. America is a breadbasket. Yeah. And it's not just payments to Black farmers. It's farmers of color. And let me explain what that definition is. Black farmers, Native American farmers, we all know the history there. Whites stole all their land. Hispanic farmers, and they're here doing the work today of migrant workers and all these things. And then you have Asian American and Pacific Islanders. Those are the ethnic groups who are able to participate in the Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color Act. And now we're not getting it. And that's what I've been describing to the people who don't understand. When you cut the money off, it makes it difficult for a certain targeted group of people to survive. And white farmers know that. We never sued white farmers when they were getting all the subsidies. Right. We sued the government, and we need them too. They suing us to stop their payments to come to us as farmers. And I think that's really egregious here, people.
Let me ask you, thank you, John, for just giving, that history of what Black farmers have been going through, because as you said, I think you're right. So many people don't even know Black farmers exist. They have no idea that the struggles and the challenges that Black farmers face is, happening as a result of the government. You typically think of, you go to the government for relief when private companies are discriminating, but in this case, it is the government, is the USDA, the arm of the government that is inflicting the pain and the suffering on Black farmers. I want to ask you about Black women farmers. That number that in 1920 there were nearly 1 million Black farmers, and here today, the fact that that number has dwindled to less than 50,000. What percentage of that 50,000 are actually Black women farmers?
Well, women outlive men, so they wind up with the farm. Okay. And there's always going to be a larger percentage of women farmers, and if you look at the history of the Black farmer in this country, the women were it. Not only did they work in the fields, but they went home and done the domestic work while we continue to work. Women made up what these farmers were all about, and I have to tell the story of my grandparents. Thomas and Martha Boyd, who had 15 children. My father, John Boyd Sr., was the last of 15 children. She got pregnant with him at the age of 49 and gave birth to him naturally at home at the ripe age of 50. Wow. Took him to the fields the next day. That's how tough Black women have endured in this country. And that's where we come from those seeds and from the mouths of these women, these very powerful women who held the families together. So women have played a tremendous role and will continue to play a tremendous role as we move forward in this whole ordeal and this actual fight that we are. And then there's a new group of women who want to be farmers and producers right now. I think it's beautiful, and that's what I've been fighting for. To have a new age of Black and other farmers of color to take a hold and buy land. And I would like to say this: if you can afford a new Cadillac or Mercedes-Benz, you can afford 5 acres in the country. Those Cadillacs and trucks and all that stuff roll off the assembly line one at a time, but God don't make no more land. Mm-hmm. Go out and buy yourself some land and learn how to produce healthy foods. Because guess what? If you're eating right and putting the right things into your body, you'll live longer. You'll have less, as old folks say, ailments and all of these things that really eat at especially Blacks, high blood pressure, strokes, and heart attacks affect us all at enormous rate. And even COVID affected us. But if we eat better and produce the foods in our backyard, we know that they're healthy. So I know it has nothing to do with this initiative, but
no. I love that you're saying that, because it's such a good point that you said if you can buy a car that's going to depreciate when you drive it off the lot, you can invest in farmland, you can buy property, you can own land, you can become a grower.
And you can build a home on that land. You can do anything with land. Ain't much you can do with a new car once it gets old and broke down. But the land, you can pass it along to your children. Yeah. And, as I've been doing this fight for so very, very long. And for the record, people, my name is John Boyd. And I watch these news clippings and they say, oh, some guy rode a tractor around in Washington for 2 months. That man's name is John Boyd. Some man rode some mules to Washington, 17 days. That man's name is John Boyd. And I'm a leader of this movement. And I hope that people will start to connect my name, with the movement. So I've been out here a very, very long time. It's not a new fight. It's an old fight, and I'm glad that America is finally paying some attention.
Yeah.
Issue that's long overdue, because if you're a Black person in this country, you're only 2 to 3 generations away from somebody's farm, whether you want to be from that farm or not. So don't look at farming in a bad sight or agriculture in a bad sight. Look at it as a positive thing. You know, land ownership is the most powerful tool you can possess. And if you really want to be free, own some land in this country and start to build some economic wealth so you can pass it along to the next generation.
Yeah, I want to bring into the conversation now Lawrence Lucas, John, because you hit on several points about the USDA, the discriminatory practices of the USDA that date back decades. Lawrence Lucas is the president emeritus of the USDA Coalition of Minority Employees, and he worked for the USDA in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Good morning and welcome to the special report, Lawrence. I think we...
Well, let me say this while you're waiting for Lucas to come on. I learned all about the government, how the government worked, all of the agencies, the ins and outs of protesting. I had a great mentor, and that mentor was Lawrence Lucas, very, very early on. And his home was our office for many years, where we organized and these rallies around the country. And he really has done a magnificent job and spoke up for the rights of employees. He made the issue of Blacks at USDA a very, very important subject there. So my hat goes off to Lawrence Lucas and his light body of work. And we honored him a few years ago at the National Black Farmers Association for body of work and commitment to employees and Black farmers.
Fantastic. Lawrence, do we have your audio now, Lawrence?
Yes, I'm here. I hope you can hear me, and I
thank you. Lawrence, we've been talking a lot. First of all, John gives you high praise and kudos for the work that you've done for Black employees at the USDA and for Black farmers. Wonderful, testament to you. But let's talk about your agency, and I'm gonna call it your agency because you were there for a couple of decades or near 2 decades. Documented history of discrimination against Black farmers. What was going on inside that agency that was allowed to happen and to go unchecked for so many decades?
Well, first I want to thank you for having me on, and I want to thank John for the compliment. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I worked there from 1977 to 1995. I must say that I know as much about the Black farmer issue because John Boyd pulled me into that. Back in 1995, we were at a university and we met. And I think it was St. Augustine, wasn't it, John?
Yes, it was, St. Augustine.
And we sat in a restaurant down there till about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and he explained to me what was going on with the Black farmers because my major focus was employees. From that day on, I have been deeply embedded in this problem. And we have been one of the groups that have been on the outside of the system in our approach to dealing with the problem of the institutional racism and sexism that exists at USDA. It's remarkable that we have come so far in this country, and at the same time, we haven't come far at all. And what I'm addressing is the fact that how can Black farmers not survive, and how can our leaders who have been working at this problem, been silent during certain points of time, and allowed the U.S. Department of Agriculture to steal the land, to take away the wealth, to take away a way of life for a group of people. And I don't know too much about all the other groups, but I do know and have done a great deal of research and have read about and the many reports and the articles, and John has been in many of those stories. It is unconscionable that we have today a bill before the Congress that was passed.
Lawrence, I want to stop you for a second. We're going to talk about that bill that's before the Congress. We're going to also talk about the Recovery Act and Biden's attempt to get $5 billion to Black farmers. But I want to take you back to when you were inside the USDA. You were there for 18 years. So I'm trying to understand, how could a federal agency that was designed to be of help to farmers, including all farmers, not just white farmers, but Black farmers too, engage in the kind of racist practices and policies? I've read these stories where literally farmers like John would go to their local USDA seeking loan forgiveness, seeking applications, and they would literally be torn up and thrown into the trash can. And that these USDA local officials had all of this power to act in many cases without, impunity. So I'm trying to help us understand what was going on inside this agency.
Well, what has been going on, and it still goes on, and John is correct to this day, is that you have a dysfunctional civil rights process at USDA, but in its administration and processing. It denies not only the rights of farmers, its racism and its sexism and its abuse is so deeply embedded in its culture. And if we are not willing to fight and change the culture that denies a group of people,
Lawrence, I don't want to press you, but I'm trying to understand. You were there, so workers could tear up an application. They could throw it in the trash. Would anything happen to them? Was anybody at the leadership role, saying that this is not fair? Cut it out. Give these Black farmers loans. Treat them the same way you treat white farmers. Did anybody, try to right the wrongs within the organization while you were working there?
That gets back to the statement that I made earlier. It's an embedded culture of racism and abuse that no one has put a check to. No administration has done what the Clinton administration did with the CRAT and CRIT and the research that they did during the Dan Glickman years. John will attest to that. We have not had an administration as effective as it should be, the way the Clinton administration approached the problem. And they came up with the DJ Miller report under Mike Espy and Dan Glickman, and a president that cared about the problem. When you have an administration that's allowed to abuse people's rights, to allow women to be raped, to be sexually abused, you can't just look at the problem of just Black farmers. You have to look at the institutionality of the history and the culture of USDA. And that culture denies any group of people, especially Black people, the right and the privilege to be a free people, to come to USDA and get the resources, to get the programs that white farmers get. They discriminate against the employees because you have an embedded culture that has, and no one since the Clinton administration has done anything about it to any substance. And so that's why we're here today fighting for Black farmers in this debt relief that they were long overdue.
Let me ask you this.
Lucas, can I jump in here? I think one thing that
John, I want to ask you about the Pickford settlement. That's huge, and a lot of people won't know that there was actually a class action discrimination suit filed against the USDA in the 1990s. USDA admitted that it had a history of discrimination against Black farmers, multi-billion-dollar settlement. And I read in one of the articles, I think you're quoted in it, that only about 300 plus Black farmers were able to benefit from that massive settlement.
I think, and I want to back up to one thing that I think there's so much history here. And one turnaround when we were really stuck, and you was asking what was Lucas doing on there. Lucas took me down to the Civil Rights Office, where out of all of these employees that worked at USDA, when he took me downstairs and they had civil rights down in the basement. And when we walked in there should have been a host of people there working. The front office, when we came in, there was two people, one for program complaints and the other for employment, two people working there. And when me and Lawrence walked in there, we took pictures of all of the boxes piled up on the walls that had years of dust on them. And that was the definition that was used for the Black Farm. We call it the Black Farmers case, the Pickford case. We used that case, that definition, because from 1997 until the Civil Rights Office was reopened under the Clinton years, that was the definition back from 1981 to 1997. So basically, the Civil Rights Office was closed during the Reagan administration and didn't reopen to 1997. So the people I was calling was really two little people sitting out front. And the man that took me down there was Lawrence Lucas. So he really took a chance in helping Black farmers, because he's pretty much was still he was still an employee there. He was heading out. But he was one of the few people that really took a chance and spoke out against USDA and the discrimination. The lawsuit was not a new lawsuit. We had filed that lawsuit under the Williams case in Texas and lost. We lost in multiple states in the South before we got to Judge Paul Friedman. Weeks before that, we failed in Richmond, Virginia, where Judge Thomas Flannery said he had never seen so much overwhelming discrimination that Black farmers didn't have the right legal team to present it in a format in federal court. And we walked into that courtroom in Washington, D.C., and Judge Friedman looked at Michael Sitkoff and he said, "I want to hear more about this discrimination laid out in this complaint." And I knew that day that something different was happening in federal court. So the case was historic. There was a lot of mistakes made. There were mistakes made by me and others that I tried to correct in the second lawsuit. But basically, about 20,000 Black farmers received $50,000 and 12,500 for their taxes, and 83,000 Black farm families came after the filing deadline. That means they didn't hear about it because USDA went on motion that they didn't have to notify all of those people in those boxes that I described to you, that they were eligible to take part in this lawsuit.
I want to correct something that I said then, John. I read somewhere that only 387 Black farmers received compensation from that settlement. You're saying that that's inaccurate? There were about 20.
Yeah, that's definitely that. Yes, that's inaccurate. There's about 20,000 in the first and 18,763 farmers in the late filers case out of 83,000. So
it's a small number for debt
it's
relief.
A small and a smaller number for debt relief. Pretty much nobody got debt relief. Nobody got their land out of federal inventory. And we started asking Congress to remedy that. In 2016, the measure made it into the Farm Bill. And during the conference between the House and Senate, the debt relief piece was stripped out again. So when you hear the news on Fox News and others saying it's a new loan program that excludes white farmers, it's not true. It was white farmers who was getting the debt relief the whole time. It was white farmers who was getting subsidies the whole time. It was white farmers who were getting loans and operating loans and farm ownership loans the whole time. It was Blacks and other farmers of color who struggled to participate at USDA. And the debt relief piece only entails those farmers who have direct loans and guaranteed loans at USDA. I wanted it to include all loans.
Right. I want to go back to you, Lawrence, for a second and talk about the new head of the USDA. Some folks think bringing back the Tom Vilsack that was head under Obama was a good thing. Other Black farmers I read weren't too happy and said that he was a part of the problem. Again, with your inside knowledge about that agency, what do you think about Biden's pick to head the agency?
The Coalition of Minority Employees and the Justice for Black Farmer Group took issue with President Biden selecting Tom Vilsack for that position. Tom Vilsack was there for 8 years. And a lot of the discrimination and the abuse that we're talking about continued under his leadership. We feel as though one of the things that have to happen is that he had an opportunity to do something about the backlog of cases and still the backlog of thousands of Black farmer cases that exist today. He allowed the county committee system to continue discriminating against Black farmers, and Black farmers had to still continue to go to the county committee system in order to get loans and benefits from USDA. In terms of accountability and people being punished for discriminating against Black farmers, as well as employees, that number is very low. So, and the other thing is the necessary oversight and transparency of USDA has not happened. And the one thing that we have, when we met with Tom Vilsack recently on a Zoom call, he talks about the problem, but he blames the problem as something that's outside of USDA. I want you to know that the reason why Black farmers have been discriminated against and their land taken is not because of air property primarily. It's because of the racism and sexism and the poor leadership that has been going on under the secretary after secretary, president after president, and Congress after Congress. So no, we do not support, and John Boyd has made some comments to that regard. We feel as though that was a bad choice, and based on what we see now by Secretary Vilsack not paying these farmers immediately after that bill was passed, and going through some process for when Donald Trump decided to give white farmers what they call soybean allotment. I think John has talked about that. It only took him 13 or 14 days, and he didn't go to Congress. We're now 100 and some days beyond the passage of that bill. The Secretary of Agriculture has a right to go in and look at if they know how to foreclose on Black farmers, they surely should know how to pay Black farmers the way they pay white farmers. So what I'm saying is you have a dual standard, and that dual standard does not give the benefit to Black farmers. And another thing about this program, most people think this is a Black farmer program. I want you to know on this program, that's not true. 92% of the Black farmers in this country does not benefit from this bill that was passed. And most people think that this is a Black farmer bill. 49% of the benefits go to Native Americans. 26% go to Spanish. 18% goes to Black farmers, 7% to Asians. So what I'm telling you in the numbers, that this is really not a Black farmer bill. It is a bill that benefits a lot of people, and Black farmers are getting the least of all.
Let me ask you this, John. I'm running out of time. Obviously, the efforts by Biden to get that $5 billion to Black farmers now tied up in court.
Yes.
Republican senators like Lindsey Graham call it reparations. Say it's unfair to white farmers, and that Black farmers are, as Lawrence said, are being singled out and given some kind of special treatment. We don't know what the courts are going to ultimately decide. But where you sit now as a farmer, as an activist, as a 30-year activist fighting for justice for Black farmers, what's the single most important thing you'd like to see happen with respect to the Biden administration?
To move swiftly, and you're going to have to correct it, maybe possibly through a new act of Congress. And Lucas is right. It's farmers of color, Native American, Hispanic, Pacific Islanders, all of those ethnic groups. But we need Congress to put some corrective language in the bill so that the farmers can actually get it. And the way that it's written, it makes it troublesome for us in court. But I would like to say, providing justice for Black farmers isn't unconstitutional, or farmers of color isn't unconstitutional. Providing relief to debt relief to farmers isn't unconstitutional. What was slavery was unconstitutional. Jim Crow was unconstitutional. Sharecropping, in my definition, was unconstitutional. So we need to stop letting the media play these type of spin games with issues. We have Black farmers right now who are eligible, John Bonner and others who are in foreclosure. And I don't have the corrected information to give them from this administration, i.e. the Department of Justice or USDA, or whether their farms are going to be sold or not, while the measure is being held up in court. So we need a clearer directive, one from USDA. And again, what I do agree on, Lucas, was I told the secretary, I can't tell him anything, but I advised him, was get the monies out, the relief out to farmers swiftly and quickly. And if he had done so, it would just be a court issue for white farmers. But now the payments are delayed to Black and other farmers of color. And that has been a historical pattern. Always delays when it comes to Black and other farmers of color. And we need to fix that in this country. And I think President Biden has the opportune time to do that by coming up with some measure from his administration to curtail what white farmers are doing in federal court to Black and other farmers of color, and what they've been doing the whole time in history. Like I said, taking land from Indians, taking land from Blacks. This isn't new. We just need to fix it.
Thank you so much, John, for your voice. Thank you, Lawrence. It's not easy to fight the system when you are working in the system. So as a civil rights lawyer myself, handled a lot of discrimination cases. I can only imagine how difficult it was to be a Black employee in the USDA, given the culture.
Can I make one other point?
Oh, go ahead.
Before we go, the continuation of discrimination exists right now. So for those court decisions that aren't taking that into consideration, I disagree, and the courts are wrong. Discrimination is now, and I was a farmer who was supposed to get debt relief, and here it was 20 years after the settlement, still had the same liens on my farm. Retaliation, discrimination still exists at USDA and should be taken into consideration by any judge that's watching this.
And to add to that,
I'm sorry, Lawrence, I gotta go. Obviously such a big topic. Gotta have you guys back. So much history here, so much that's going on. Even in this moment, as we sit here with this administration, I really appreciate both of your voices. I promise I'll get back to this subject. I'm intrigued by it. I'm a history buff, and just so much for us to learn about this. Again, thank you so much for your voices this morning.
Thanks for having me on.
My next guest, as you can see, this is a huge subject, and we're just beginning to unpack it. We're really just on the surface of this issue, and I want to come back to it. But I have two guests that I wanted to bring on because they have both studied Black farmers and U.S. agriculture for decades. I want to welcome to the show Pete Daniel. He is a public historian and past president of the Organization of American Historians and author of multiple books, including Dispossession, Discrimination Against African American Farmers in the Age of Civil Rights. And also joining him this morning is Clyde Ford. Clyde is an independent African American scholar and award-winning author of multiple books, including The Hero with an African Face. He's also the author of a chapter on the history of Black farming in Natalie Brazil's book, We Are Each Other's Harvest. Good morning, Clyde. Good morning, Pete. Thanks to both of you for joining me. I'm sure you heard the spirited discussion I'm having with John and Lawrence. So much here to unpack about Black farmers that I think so many people didn't know. I want to start with you, Clyde. We touched on that Order 15, but give us the history of Order 15 and what promise was made to enslaved people, after the Emancipation Proclamation by then President Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, well, one of the things that most people first of all, thank you very much, Areva, for inviting me on this program. What an honor to be on with John Boyd and Lawrence Lucas, really some of the people who are at the forefront of this struggle. Historically, after the Civil War, one of the things that was really clear, and let me say this, these are Republicans. Republicans nowadays want to wrap themselves in the mantle of Abraham Lincoln. They call themselves the party of Lincoln. So I say to them, be the party of Lincoln. The party of Lincoln, right after the Civil War, realized that they did not have a plan for African American farmers. And so what happened is that General Sherman in 1865 went down to South Carolina and asked Black farmers, what do you want the federal government to do? And they said, give us land. Just like they're saying, just like you heard John say right now. And so General Sherman then came up with this Special Orders 15 that we know is 40 acres and a mule. And what that did was to give Black farmers, check this out, almost 1 million acres of land, some of the prime farmland in the South. And they actually started distributing that land to Black farmers. At least 40,000 Black farmers and families actually occupied land in South Carolina, in Georgia, North Carolina, and other places, prime farmland. But then Lincoln was shot. Andrew Johnson became president, and the first thing that he did was to rescind, take away, take back Special Orders 15, which gave that farmland, excuse me, to Black farmers. Right there, you see the process that has taken place over the years, where you say, I'm going to do this, and then you pull back from it. And who then gets the worst end of the deal is African American and Black farmers. Look, that Special Orders 15 was an instance of reparations that was put forth by Lincoln Republicans. And so I'll say this again. If you Republicans today want to consider yourself part of the party of Lincoln, then Lincoln proposed reparations to Black farmers and to Black slaves. You ought to be on the side of reparations and giving back to Black farmers what they deserve today as well.
Pete, I want to bring you into the conversation. If that land that Clyde just talked about, that those farmers in South Carolina told General Sherman they wanted, if land had been given to Black folks coming out of slavery in 1865, what would that land be worth today?
What's the last part of your question?
What would the land be worth? Do you know, in terms of monetarily, what would that land be worth if it had been given to Black farmers?
Well, what it's worth now, of course, it's been developed as these gated communities out on the Sea Islands, a lot of it. So it'd be worth a great deal.
And,
trillions of dollars.
Okay.
Right, Clyde.
One of the things, Clyde, that we all have heard this promise about 40 acres and a mule. We if you know history, you know that it was rescinded. The order was rescinded after Lincoln was assassinated. Tell us historically, were there ever any attempts after Lincoln's assassination, after the rescinding of Order 15, to make good on that kind of promise to Black farmers, or to restore land to Black farmers following the rescission of that order?
Yeah, there were a couple of attempts. There was the Port Royal experiment, which happened after that time. Again, an instance where the federal government attempted to give back to African Americans who were formerly slaves and Black farmers land in the Sea Islands area of Georgia and South Carolina. It didn't go any place because, again, it was voted down at the federal level in Congress to stop that process. So there really has never been a serious attempt to do what was done with 40 acres and a mule. And I have to tell you this, and I really found this out, what I'm about to say, after I wrote that chapter for Natalie Bazile's book, is that even the original 40 acres and a mule, the program that was conceived by General Sherman, after Johnson became president, he then went to Congress and said, and there's a letter in the congressional records to this effect, hey, y'all, we really didn't mean that we were ever going to give that land to African Americans anyway. We just wanted them to think that until we could figure out what to do. So I got to say that even the original 40 acres and a mule Special Orders 15 was the same type of ruse that we see being played and perpetrated on Black farmers to this day, as you've heard John Boyd and Lawrence Lucas so eloquently describe. The same process is happening. And once again, I'll say, go back to history. If you're going to be honest as a Lincoln Republican, then you need to pick up where Lincoln left off, and that is redistribution of land. And if that's not possible because of all the development, then redistribution of the wealth that came from the land that was promised to Black farmers that was taken away so they could not build and pass on that wealth. That's the history. That's what needs to be done in terms of this present day and age.
And Pete, we know that this whole issue about Black farmers came to my attention because of Biden's efforts to get that $5 billion in the COVID relief bill out to Black farmers, and then the backlash, the lawsuit that was filed that has now held those dollars up. Why do you think the movement, the civil rights movement, the activists, the Black farmers who have been on the forefront of fighting for the rights of Black farmers, it doesn't get nearly the attention that Blacks fighting in some of the urban areas in the 60s and 70s get? Why do you think that the rural farmers' struggle for civil rights, has been underplayed to a certain degree in this country?
Well, as one of our people said, most people don't know anything about agriculture. And most people are just totally ignorant of how to farm, where things come from that they buy. And the other thing is that I studied mostly the 1960s, which was during the civil rights movement. And it was during those years that probably the bulk of African-American farmers went under. This was a Democratic administration under Kennedy and Johnson, and the Department of Agriculture was racist. In particular, if you go down to those local committees, county committees that have been discussed, which were always composed of the elite white farmers in the county. And they control who got money, who got allotments, who got loans, all that. They were in total control. And of course, SNCC challenged that in 1964, right after Freedom Summer. And if you want a lesson in how discrimination is manifested by the Department of Agriculture, I have 3 chapters in the book on how this happened. And so it continues. The Department of Agriculture in those days was racist. And of course it continued, as Lawrence said, they just piled up documents, as John said, in the office and didn't do anything about them. Mm-hmm. They threw them away or filed them. So how do you do that if you're not racist? Mm-hmm. And today, all this whining by white farmers who've had everything all along. And as soon as you get a bill that gives some compensation to African-American farmers, you have all this whining like they're being damaged. Well, that's nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Clyde, as a civil rights lawyer, I think of the federal statutes, anti-discrimination statutes, and, representing people who work for private companies and some governmental entities. But you think of the federal government as being the safe harbor, the place you go to get, racist policies or to, get your rights against discrimination, remedied. That's where you're going, seeking a remedy from the federal courts, using those federal statutes. But in the case of Black farmers, we have the federal agency itself being the center, being the focal point, being the group that is discriminating. And it's hard for me, I think, to wrap my brain around how from administration to administration to administration, that agency has not been held account, that culture has not been upended, somebody hasn't gone in there and just totally, fix that problem. You can fix a culture. You can end discrimination by an agency. This is not an intractable problem if you have the will to do it.
Well, Areva, look, let me make a tie-in to what's going on right now as we speak. Right now as we speak, you have Republicans across the South enacting voter suppression. You've heard John, you've heard Lawrence, you've heard Pete talk about local committees. Those local committees for farms were actually voted on by the farmers. If Blacks don't have the right to vote, it wasn't just at the national presidential level that voting rights was important. It was at those local levels who voted who would be in charge of these farm committees that dispensed information, credit access, loans. So if you can't vote, you're not able to go to the polls. Forget about even voting for the president. You can't vote for the committee that will actually determine whether you can make a living as a farmer. That's why voting rights is so important. Look, during the civil rights movement in the South, as Pete mentioned, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, realized that the ability to vote was important for Black farmers because that would allow them to control the people who then gave them the loans. The same problem is going on right now. Look, we've got a voting rights problem which ought to be solved, or at least attempted to be solved at a national level. I think the Biden White House is still struggling to come up with a plan. They're talking about, well, maybe there'll be enough efforts on the part of those who are discriminated against by pursuing various, organizing strategies to counteract this Republican effort to voter suppression. It shouldn't be that.
I hear what you're saying, Clyde, but one thing, and I'm going to bring Lawrence back into this conversation. Lawrence said that Vilsack, USDA head, it was a part of the problem, and in his opinion, and the opinion of lots of Black farmers, is still a part of the problem. I gotta stay on this because the head of that agency, we're not voting for. He's not on the ballot. The employees that are, running that agency are not on the ballot. So somebody has the ability to go in there and wipe all of those employees out, to get rid of them and to change that culture. And I'm trying to understand, why hasn't that happened, even under Democratic administrations that I'm going to just make a broad assumption that want to see Black farmers prosper, that are not like these Republicans that are hell bent on destroying Black farmers. So help us understand Obama and now Biden appointing Vilsack. And let me ask you this, Clyde, you can weigh in, and I want Pete to weigh in. Do you all agree that Vilsack himself is a part of the problem?
Absolutely. I was saddened when I heard that Biden appointed Vilsack. I couldn't understand that. Just on the political optics, it sends a message that we're going to do things like we used to do things. He didn't do that at EPA when he appointed an African-American fellow to come and actually lead our efforts there. Why wouldn't the president send the message that my farm administration is going to do something different? He didn't do it. And so I really think that sent the wrong message, got things off on the wrong foot. The funds were not distributed the way they should have. And frankly, we're right back where we started. We never made those efforts. And I would say the administration never did. That's where it should start. We did vote for Biden, and I was hoping that that vote for Biden would have meant a change in who he appointed, so Vilsack would not be back in the same position he was in before.
Pete, what's your opinion about Vilsack? Do you think Biden made a poor choice in putting Vilsack back? Clyde makes a good argument that putting the guy back in the job who was a part of the problem sends the message that the problem is not going to get fixed.
Oh, yeah. I was shocked, like Clyde was. I could not believe that he would bring back in a person who had been detrimental to African-American farmers. And I just can't, well, it shows actually how thorough the Department of Agriculture is with its racism. And you asked why nobody had cleaned it out. I think you'd have to abolish it. I've often suggested that they should throw all the people in USD out of the building on the mall and turn it into a museum about farming. So teach people a little bit about rural life and how it works. Because how do you reform an agency as large as USDA? And there are lots of places for racists to hide because they're never going to say, hello, I'm a racist. But they can hide in a bureaucracy. And I'm sure Lawrence knows this fully well, that people can hide and keep saying the right thing while doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Lawrence, did you see any efforts made to clean the agency up, change the culture, get rid of the known bad actors? I agree with Pete. Racists have their way of covering up and, acting in the dark of the night. And there's insidious racism. And in the era that we live in today, it's not always overt. But were there any efforts while you were there to try to clean that agency up?
Well, I think that the Clinton administration made the best effort that goes on record that I can see and be able to track. They made with their CRAT and CRIT reports and the accountability system that they put in place for resolving the complaints. the accounting, the transparency that they had, their effort to make sure there was plenty oversight of the civil rights process. I agree with Brother Ford and Brother Daniels. What we have concluded, that the USDA Office of Civil Rights should be put into receivership. And what I mean by receivership, I mean just like you put a state and a city and a county and institutions in receivership when they're not doing their job. What you need to do is remove the level of authority and the level of authority and control and put it under independent body outside of USDA to make sure that the culture and the racism and the sexism and abuse that go on stops. That is one of the solutions that we have. And we had hoped that with a return of a Democratic administration, that the Biden administration will see through the smoke screen that exists around USDA, that only Tom Vilsack can solve the problem. I disagree with that. I think it was a bad choice, and I think the choices are obvious based on what is going on now and his lack of intestinal fortitude and responsibility to make sure those payments were sent out to the farmers immediately and not give it time for the courts and racist groups around the country to file lawsuits. I think he allowed that to happen because he did not act in a speedy and just way.
And let me ask you this, just a couple of final questions before we run out of time, Clyde, but I assume, nobody thinks Mr. Vilsack himself is a racist. So what is it that he's not getting about the plight of Black farmers? We heard, Lauren say that he's not acting expeditiously, he's not necessarily thinking strategically, but, he's a smart guy. So what is he missing about this process?
Institutional racism. The fact that you can have an institution that has a history and legacy of policies and practices, and if you don't do anything to destroy them, take them away, remove them, dismantle them, sure, you may yourself not be racist, but the institution your work has a history and a backlog which demonstrates systemic racism. You have to dismantle that specifically. You can't just say, I'm not a racist, but I'm still operating on the policies and practices of an institution that has that long history of racism.
And last question for you, Pete. What can our viewers do? People are just learning about this. So many people are going to be, I know my comments section is going to be filled with people saying they had no idea this was going on, that we had 1 million Black farmers and now we have less than 50,000, and that they are literally fighting with their own government just to have some kind of parity. Is there anything that viewers, that voters can do to address this issue or to be a part of the solution?
I really don't know. I was surprised in the 60s that rural life wasn't on the radar. The civil rights movement, as was mentioned earlier, was in the cities. And a lot of the work that SNCC was doing out in the countryside was ignored. And of course, the fight of SNCC against these county committees was pretty much ignored, except in the Black press. So what do you do? I don't know anything that can be done to get rid of this institutional racism, as Clyde has said, because it's so deep.
Oh, all right, Lawrence, I'll let you take a stab at it. You have any suggestions for viewers?
Can I jump in there and
go ahead, Clyde?
I was going to jump in there and say, I think there are some things that individual Americans can do. A lot of people today want to eat healthy and they want to buy from a local co-op or a farmer's market. Go to that co-op, as I have to my local co-op and my farmer's market, and say, buy Black. Make sure that Black farmers are represented in that public market. Make sure that Black farmers are represented in the co-op. Go to Whole Foods and say, look, I want to make sure that Black farmers in my area also have the opportunity to sell their produce here. We can support Black farmers. And obviously we can vote to make sure we've got the right people in who will make the right decisions about appointing agency heads. But as individual consumers, we can vote with where our pocketbook is and the foods that we pay for.
Excellent, excellent point, Clyde. Lawrence, you get the last word.
Well,
What can people do?
What people need to do is hold their public officials accountable during this 2022 election cycle. Demand at the U.S. Department of Agriculture that the Secretary of Agriculture, he works for the president. We can blame it on him, but I think the shared responsibility is that his boss is the president of the United States, and he should make sure that the cases that have been filed, that have been on file at USDA are now being addressed. We want to make sure the backlog of cases are resolved. We want to make sure the Office of General Counsel does not control the civil rights process. We want to make sure that the county committee system that has been existing all these years have nothing to say about one Black farmer receiving a loan or programs. We need to make sure there's accountability, that people who are engaged in this discrimination are held accountable. And we need to make sure that the transparency that is needed by this administration is adhered to, and demand that the Secretary of Agriculture sits down and talk to people that want to bring about the solution, and not to people who he depends on to support him, that he funds in these programs and universities around the country. And he needs to be talking to people that have the solution and be a part of that solution and not be a part of the problem.
And thank you, Lawrence, for that comprehensive summary of what people can do, because people want to take action and they want to impact in a positive way these policies. Are you suggesting that they write to the president, that they write to Vilsack? Who should they be directing their demands to? Is it their local Congress people, their senators?
They need to number one, direct their letters and their words and their comments to the president directly. They need to also make sure that Scott, who's chair of the House Agriculture Committee, understands and realize that the American people during this election cycle are going to hold them accountable. If he does not do his job about fixing the problem at USDA, you got to make sure that Senator Stabenow, who heads up the Agriculture Committee, make sure she does what she's supposed to do. And also the two important people here, or three. Elizabeth Warren is the person who has been supporting and brought about this legislation. She should be contacted. Senator Booker of New Jersey, who brought about the Justice for Black Farmer Act, should be also contacted. And Senator Warnock from Georgia is also a part of that equation. So we want the farmers, we want decent Americans to speak up. Just like we spoke up and changed things, we're changing things in the social environment around this country. We need to bring about that same social consciousness to change the racism and sexism and abuse that's going on against employees as well as farmers in this country. That's what
All right. We've got to leave it there, Lawrence. That is comprehensive. So if anybody says, they don't know what to do, well, they weren't listening to you, because you've given them clear directions on who to contact and how they can be involved in this fight for justice for Black farmers. Thank you so much, Lawrence, for your voice. Thank you, Clyde. Yes, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, every grocery store we shop at should be buying produce from Black farmers, and we can definitely voice our support for those Black farmers in terms of where we spend our dollars. Thank you so much, Pete, for being on this issue, for your years of studying Black farmers and for the work that you've done. Really, really important issue. I've learned so much today myself. I'm sure my viewers have as well. I really appreciate all of you sitting down with me and talking about justice for Black farmers, because justice for Black farmers is justice for all Americans.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Wow, what a
thank you, Areva.
Oh, you guys are so welcome. What a super informative conversation, spirited conversation with some of the leading voices on Black farmers in this country. If you're eating anything and if you're alive, you are eating something. It was grown someplace by a farmer. And today we're asking to make sure that that farmer those farmers that are growing the food that feeds this nation also includes farmers of color. That's not a whole lot to ask for. Just some words to live by before I get out. We must stop laying the burden of fighting for racial justice on the backs of the very people bearing the brunt of the injustices. It is time for the powerful people who maintain the injustices to get in the ring and to step up. Let that sink in. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Wear your mask. And remember, we are all in this together.